Hello and welcome to the podcast You're Better Than That, hosted by me, Hannah Miller, and joined by my friend Zoe.
Hello.
Hi Zoe.
How are you?
We are back.
We
I'm
are.
all right, thank you.
I'm really excited about this episode. A lot of people, and even just Laura and I, think that you don't really share your story and how you came to do what you're doing now today, and the twists and turns and how you've kind of ended up where you are now. And so I thought it'd be really nice to have an episode where you share your story and share weaving in some lessons maybe that you've learned along the way, but generally just hearing about Hannah behind the podcast, behind the scenes. Who is Hannah and how have you ended up where you are?
Okay. And also, I'll give a little shout out to Tommy, who I've been doing some coaching with, because she said to me, we had this conversation. She asked me to tell her a bit of my story, and she said that should be a podcast episode because it's helpful for people to hear like a beginning to hear and to hear a little bit of the behind the scenes to that. So yeah, I'll give it a go.
Go for it.
So I won't start with the childhood years. We'll start from those things come out anyway in the conversations. But I went to university and I went and studied. I did a kind of business and marketing degree. I went to Birmingham University and my degree was in business, but I focused on marketing, advertising, the psychology of sort of connecting with people, the people side of the work. And my first job in leaving university, I was married. So I got married really young to Sam. That's how come we've been married 25 years already. And my first job was with an advertising company involved in the world of advertising. And I really did think, based on sort of my interests and some of the things I'd done, that this was a great first move for me. There was quite a commute. I had quite a commute to work. And we were looking at how advertising is effective or not. So our job was to make sure that clients, large companies, that were spending, huge amounts of money advertising, that they were spending it correctly and that the messages were clear and that the audience got the message. That was what we did as an organisation. And actually very quickly, I can't even fully sort of explain why, but very quickly I just wasn't feeling that I should be there, very quickly. And I am by nature a bit more rash, and I am by nature somebody who feels things or doesn't feel things. But I remember being in London, and I remember being in a conversation with, I think it was PG Tips, and we were there together talking about the direction of travel for their advertising. And there is no judgment here, but I just remember feeling I just don't care enough for this to be what I do.
Sure.
So that was my first clue. That was my first clue. Not that people shouldn't care, not that this is wrong, but a clue around if I'm going to spend this much time away from home and travelling, I have got to care about it. And so there's a clue there in understanding our values and understanding who we are and learning to prioritise those in the decisions we make. And I'm not remotely trying to sound virtuous. And in fact, there's lots of things that were really interesting about that work. But for that time, that season, that period of my life, I just thought, I don't think I fit here. And I had clues that I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole. So I remember coming home from work, I'd had this long drive home and I'd had a little bit of an idea about being involved in a charity setup. I had, through various personal reasons, experienced through friendships and family members some of the issue that younger people were feeling around relationships and the health of relationships, and that mattered to me. So I had this kind of like brainwave in the car, another lesson. Just having the time to drive or have a shower or be off duty, I've often had some really interesting personal revelations in the most unexpected ways. And I came home and I said to Sam, I don't think I want to do this job. I'm not sure it's the right thing for me. And I want to set up a charity. I want to be involved in a charity startup. And I've probably said this before, Sam's got very, very big bandwidth for risk. So he is not the person who's going to sort of, if he said this is a bad idea, then I would know it really was, because he's very kind of like, okay, we'll give it a go. He's much more inclined to adventure. So very quickly, this began to gather pace. So essentially, I left work. I stepped away from that job, and I started to build a network of people that could help get this off the ground. Another kind of reflection, when I reflect back on this, I was like 21, okay? No age. I did not know what I was doing. I had never done this before. I had no idea how you set up a charity. I had no idea about budgets. I had no idea about the inner machinations of making this work. And I didn't really have a huge plan. I wrote down a bit of a sort of a strategy document of where I thought this could go. But I really do want to emphasize that I kind of had the next steps rather than a master plan. But one of my strengths and my personality is about connecting with people, telling a story and getting people on board. So people did. And so we had this mass of volunteers who were involved in counselling and support, and we went into schools and we delivered education. So we followed that thread, and I enjoyed it, and I loved the whole entrepreneurial aspect of it being a brand new thing and starting up. That suited who I was. I like early momentum. That was another clue I learned about myself. I'm not so good at maintaining. Because what I learned is I went and had my first baby, which is Noah. And on return, I was beginning to feel I transitioned into a new phase of my life. I was now a mother. I returned part-time. But I was beginning to feel like my contribution and the thing that I did best was beginning to come to an end. So that was another moment of transition of I'm now a slightly different person. I've had this time off. Lots of people I work with start to reflect on next steps when they've had time off or seasons have changed. And I started to think, I'm not sure I've got the same momentum for this that I'd had before. What am I going to do? And again, I'd had this... I'd enjoyed the educating part. I'd enjoyed the teaching, the communicating part of what I was doing and going into schools and doing that. And I thought about Teach First. I thought about a few different options, and I ended up training to be a teacher. So I followed that thread. And I think the way I'm kind of describing it in the way I'm talking is, if you can almost imagine, this is the picture coming to mind, of almost like a rope that's in the dark, like at sort of a waist height, not a rope on the floor, bless you, but like a rope at waist height that I'm feeling along and I can feel the next bit and I follow it. And it's never been more clear than that, really, than what's the next thing. So I decided to train as a teacher, and I actually started off working in an independent school, and my teaching career began there. And I was enjoying what I was doing, and there was an emphasis at that point in my life that it needed to fit around my childcare and my children, and that was the top priority. So other things are deprioritised at that point. And I think that also happened. So we readjusted the priority order based on what we need in any given time, and that job was part-time, and it was a good fit around my other obligations. It wasn't a good fit around finance or anything like that, but it was a good fit around other things that were important to me. I then got a job in a different school where I took on a bit more responsibility and began to sort of grow in my teaching career. I also had an amazing mentor at that time, Annabelle, if you're listening. She was the best example I've had of workplace mentoring and support. Very capable, competent, confident, and also willing to say where I was capable and competent as well. She gave it away. She was generous with that. She called out what I was capable of. And I remember in just the first couple of weeks of working for her, where she kind of just said, this is what you're going to be in leadership. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Wow. And massively impacted me, because I just thought, I just want to be like you. I want to be me, but like you, you know? So worked there. And actually I joined there after having my second son, Jude, and stayed there until I'd had my third boy, Levi. So that was that next period. After Levi, I got a job at what then became sort of the most important part of these years. I'd loved all those things, and they'd played into it, but they were essentially getting me to the school I then went to, which was a school that had very high deprivation. there was a brand new head teacher who was coming in to turn the school around that was in a bit of a mess. And the school needed to be sort of pulled up by its bootstraps, really. And she was quite new in post when I began. And I got a job there that was initially felt like I want to be in this school. I want to make a difference in this school, and I'm going to take a job that I'm going to get there. Very different to where I'd been previously working. Very, very different situation. Very different children, very different needs. The school was in a very different stage of its life cycle. But it was where I wanted to go. And again, another kind of clue, a value around fairness and around equal opportunity is something that I have really wanted to pull through in my life. So started working there, and I got more and more responsibility in the years I went by. And what I learned then was that teaching had been a vehicle into a sort of understanding of my strengths and talents, which were around communicating, around educating people. So I often say that this podcast or anything that I do in terms of training is I take principles or perhaps even other people's ideas and I make them accessible for people. And I began to realise that that's what I could do. I could take something that's really interesting or hard to get your head around and make it something that people could understand. So I'm not the most innovative of individuals. I'm not somebody who comes up with wildly fresh ways of doing things. I'd love to be that person. I don't think I am. But I think I can take things and I can make them accessible. I can make them, people can understand them and relate, and the story behind it helps people to connect. When I was a teacher, I told lots of stories, and I'd tell stories about the family and anything that could hook them in to then, share the knowledge. And I have high expectations of like bringing your best and doing your best. So my role then turned into essentially developing teachers, helping teachers become better at what they do, giving them feedback, giving them the support in order to bring the best quality education. And I did that in my school, and I did that in other schools. I was also involved in teacher training. So lots of things that are in this development space. Within teaching, I thought, I love this. I love the student stuff. I loved having teaching students. I loved seeing people grow in what they did. And the thing I loved the most as a teacher was enabling people to do something they couldn't do before. So again, there's another thread there. There's another thread of, that idea of progress, of development that was I had probably done in lots of different environments. I'd been involved in youth work for many years previous. There's lots of other things I'd done. And there's a theme in terms of the things I'd enjoyed. I'd been a piano teacher. I had been seeing people make progress in what they were able to do and what they're able to achieve. So all's going well. I've had my boys. We're in that sort of, bobbing along, and we're both bobbing along in what we're doing. And then we hit a bit of a collection of road bumps. And I think this is quite an important part to share, really, that the next kind of phase of my trajectory and my life story came out of a really difficult time and didn't come out of, nice next step and, next moving along. It didn't come out of that. It came out of quite a bit of pain and really probably a bit of an emotional breakdown, for not wanting to use a word loosely. It was really hard. So we had a year where my husband, which I haven't mentioned, he had been working for and leading a charity that he had started. So there was another charity that was started in the midst of all this. And he'd been leading that and leading the team for a long time. And he'd been beginning to wonder about whether it was time for him to pass the baton on. And when you are a founder, that's a very big question. How do you move on? Can you move on? How do you succession plan when you're somebody who's founded something? So he was beginning to have these big questions of his own that was starting to wrestle inside of him. And again, maybe we were at a natural point of reassessment. Our boys were all here, family was complete. Perhaps there was that element of what was happening. Alongside that, we had some natural curveballs that occurred. One was my father-in-law died running in the park. So that was a very sudden loss. He was young and he was running and just didn't come home. And for us as a family, that was, I mean, loss is hard, but it was sudden loss. It was unexpected loss. The youngest of all of our parents, not retired, you know, in that still working phase, and shocking to deal with. Even though we, you know, you can find peace in those things, it was shocking for us and for our children, and a really, you know, discombobulating thing to happen. And it was around that time that Sam was thinking, I think I need to leave my job, but I've worked here for a very long time. And he'd never had a job interview or gone down a normal job path. And he's like, what am I even qualified to do? And I'm getting to a place where work is becoming really difficult. So a work that I had loved, had long and short of it for a variety of reasons, some of which are my fault, that I would do differently now if I could go back, and lots of things that were not my fault, work became a very difficult place to be. I didn't feel like it matched my values anymore. I didn't feel like I felt part of the team anymore. And I was grieving, so probably sensitive. And some things were handled really quite badly, including by me. So I am not blaming anybody. I'm including myself in that. But it became a place that was, I realise now, was not psychologically safe. And I would go to work and I wasn't necessarily safe. And the reason I recognise that is that when I left, I felt I literally could breathe differently. And again, I'm sharing that not for a pity party. I'm sharing that because there will be people listening who work in places where they are realising that it's not just about the workload. It's not safe psychologically, I mean. So on top of all of that, there were a few other things that happened. And again, I'm sharing this. I really want to make it clear. I'm just giving you a picture of the season that we were in. My mum was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and she was was beginning to deteriorate. My sister and my brother-in-law, who I was, you know, am unbelievably close to, had just at the time of Sam's dad's death moved to Kent. So having lived in my city and we'd been in and out of each other's immediate proximity, like you are with your sister, they moved 4 hours away. And that's a normal thing to happen, but it was a loss because we'd never lived away from each other, not very far. We'd never lived that far away from one another. So it was a totally new dimension, just at the point when everything was very hard. On top of that, I remember my parents phoning not long after Sam's dad had died and said, we know your mother-in-law is going to really need you and your mum is going to need more care in the coming years. So we're going to move and live near your sister. So my parents left as well. So my support system through death and illness, deterioration, life circumstance, new career, new jobs, literally vanished. And I was just gutted. I'm not going to put it any other way. I was gutted for my parents to move away. I was gutted that my sister moved away. I was gutted that my father-in-law had died, and I was gutted that I didn't love my job. And I was gutted that Sam no longer wanted to do his and didn't know what he was going to do. And that was kind of the autumn. The following Easter, we went to Norway as a family because Sam's parents had always wanted to take their family to Norway and it had never happened. And so we decided we would take our children to Norway. And the last text conversation I had with my friend was about the view we could see out of our window. And I sent a beautiful picture of what I could see. And she was a training midwife. And she said, this is my view. And it was like a really ugly city view. And it was a joke that we'd had between us. Got back from that holiday and she had a headache. And that headache was something she had all night, which meant she went to the GP who sent her to hospital. And I got a phone call at work, and obviously it's not easy to get hold of you when you're a teacher. So at lunchtime, I'd check my phone, and I'd got so many missed calls, ring now. And the news was that my best friend had got a brain aneurysm the size of a golf ball, and she was at the hospital waiting to be transferred to the QE, which is the best place to be for that. And she was waiting to get transferred there. A woman I worked with, who was a colleague of mine, who was deputising for the head that day, she said, you need to go now. And she had lost her brother to a brain aneurysm. She said, go now, Hannah. So I left. And she had an operation to try and stop this aneurysm before it kind of popped. And and there were complications, there were significant complications. And essentially, she was in rehabilitation for many months. She was, a whisker away from losing her life. And it took months and months for her to be able to go home. She's never been able to communicate the same. And she had to give up so much in that time. She also didn't come from a very big family situation. And so therefore, there was another huge event, which was devastating and needed my support like anyone would for a friend. Like, that's nothing heroic about that. But I was in the thick of it. And that year was the year when we were like, what are we doing about work and what are we even doing? So all the balls are thrown in the air. That's the way all the balls feel like they've been thrown in the air. And I'm an emotional person, and I literally can remember every day crying. Every single day, 4 months, I cried about some sort of level of loss or not. I mean, to watch your friend go through that level of pain and discomfort and loss of life in terms of the life she'd ever known at the age of 40, she wasn't quite 40 actually, was a huge thing on top of everything that had happened. And the reason I'm saying all that is that sometimes when we're in the most painful situations, we reassess things. We start to think about, what do we want to do? What are we here for? What's going on? And the pain and the difficulty of work, which was nothing compared to that, but was really hard, I just started to think, I just am not willing to do this anymore. It's just not worth it. I don't want to feel like this when I go to work. And I knew something had happened because I'd done many, many years in this profession, and I'd done many, many years of giving my all. I'm not a stranger to hard work. I've got the blood, sweat and tears of long hours and giving my all. I was part of the team that got that school to outstanding from pretty much special measures. So I was not a stranger to everything it asked of me, but I just was like, no longer, I just can't do this anymore, for a whole variety of reasons. And again, I followed the thread. I kind of followed the thread, what was next. And I think the thing that I'd realised in all of this, and I actually can remember standing in the reception of the school and something happened. And I remembered that I had done this personality test many years previous, which is the strengths assessment. And for some reason, it like came back to my consciousness in that moment. And I was thinking about my strengths and what I'd learned about myself. And I had this moment of like epiphany, which was, that's why this is so hard for you. That's why this isn't giving you what you need. And that's why you are unhappy. And it was the one thing that was kind of in my agency in all of this was, what am I going to do about work? And I remember thinking, if we knew our strengths in this team, that would help us to work more effectively together. And so I decided that was probably going to be the direction I was going to take. I didn't know what it was going to look like. There was not a master plan. I had no idea I would be doing some of the things I'm doing today, but I thought strengths is going to feature. So I decided to get trained to use the tool. And I did that whilst I was working in the school, and I practiced it in school and I practiced it in other places that I could get the opportunity to do so. And I negotiated with work to reduce down to 3 days. That was the first decision. That didn't really make enough of a difference to me because of all the rubbish that was going on in my private life. And so all I was doing was spending those other 2 days actually doing all the things that needed to be done for the unravelling mess around life, because Sam had also decided that he was going to leave his job with no idea what he was going to go to, but he didn't feel that it had integrity to stay. So we're like not telling my parents that we're making these decisions because they would have panicked, but literally walking away from work. And I'm like, I'm reducing my hours at a time when really I should be adding them. And actually, I just want to say there was a moment where I was going to go down to 1 day a week because I decided I was going to leave. And my boss said, can you do a day a week? And I was like, that's actually really good. It gives me 1 day's pay. When everything we thought that was going to line up for Sam didn't line up. And I'm thinking, okay, we've made these bold decisions before, but this time we've got 3 children and a mortgage, and it's a bit different. And we don't have a safety net. We don't have people who can sort of bail us. They could bail us out in the short term, but not in the long term. And I remember there was a job at school where I had given this school loads of support, and it was a deputy headship. And I knew if I put an application in, it's mine. I'm a known entity. I've done loads for them. I will not have to. It's definitely my job. And I don't mean that arrogantly, but that I was a known entity and I was good at what I did. And I filled in this application and I was like, I've got to do this. And it was a moment of sensible versus risk. And my heart was like sinking, so sinking. It felt like the complete wise thing to do, but my heart was sinking. And I was so close to doing it because I'm a bit of a control freak and I wanted to bring control back. I wanted to get, I wanted to make sure we could live. And there are lots of reasons why that would be a very wise choice. And I'm not saying this is a right or wrong thing, but a little part of me was dying inside because it was going to be, it wasn't an easy situation. And Sam just was like, Hannah, what are you doing? I'm not asking you to do this. I don't think this is the right thing for you to do. And there was also another job I went for a couple of, there's a couple of things I sort of touched at, which was about me wanting to go back to the safe option. And I didn't apply. I decided to withdraw. Oh, well, I didn't withdraw. I just didn't send it. I just felt like it was, the night of the closing night. And I just thought, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wait a bit. If I still need to do this in a bit, then another job will come up and I can go back to it. So that became the beginning of starting the business, which is now 9 years old. We're 9 years down the line, I think. I can't believe it. And it's evolved. It hasn't been a master plan. Maybe some people have one. I didn't have one. I've followed my nose and thought, what do I love to do? I love to talk. I love to communicate. I love to help people make progress. I love to encourage people. I like to see the penny drop for people. I like to see people doing what they're made to do. I love seeing people go on and do things in their work and their lives that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise and they just needed a nudge. I love having the chance to do live communication to groups of leaders where I'm kept on my toes and they're people who are more experienced than me and more capable than I am, and I'm bringing my bit of contribution. And I feel that's a massive privilege to be able to do, which hasn't come without risk and hasn't come without dedication and hard work. But every year it's unfolded a little bit more. I think there's 2 more things I kind of want to say, particularly, and then you can tell me if there's anything I've forgotten. We're called Sidekick as a company, and that was something that came out of this idea that being a sidekick is often seen as a negative thing. It's used as, oh, you're my little sidekick, a bit disparagingly. But I wanted to flip that on its head. Sometimes I've felt like a sidekick in lots of environments. I have felt at times like I've been an also-ran. I was in the popular group at school, but I was not the ringleader. I was the sidekick too. And there have been lots of other environments where I felt I've been that sidekick. And I felt that pain of feeling like I'm not that centre stage person. I'm the one that's alongside. And I felt like, as I thought about sidekicks, I started to think actually they are unbelievably essential and often more capable than the hero. But they're definitely instrumental. And so whether that's Hermione to Harry Potter or Samwise to Frodo or Gandalf to Frodo or Tigger to Pooh or Piglet to Pooh actually or any other Batman and Robin, any other Sherlock and Watson, it doesn't matter what it is, none of those centre stage individuals would be able to do what they do if those people didn't give them what they needed. And so I wanted to redeem it and make it something that was really important. And I believe that everybody needs a sidekick, and I would like to play that role, and everyone should be one to somebody else. That's if we all did that, we'd all be growing. And then the last kind of piece of the puzzle is COVID. And I said in a podcast the other day, during COVID, lots of people started to reach out to me, and my one-to-one coaching around purpose just started to explode. I wasn't even asking for it. I wasn't putting out messages around it, but people kept saying, Hannah, can I talk to you about this? And I'd like to understand more about what I should do next. I'm reflecting on it. It was like this exponential interest in purpose. And we were on holiday in France. Randomly, we got to France the first year of the pandemic when things were like more open. And then the second year of the pandemic, we couldn't get to France. Very odd. But the first year we did, we got to France. And I was on holiday in France and had this, again, bit of a light bulb moment where I thought, I'd like to take everything that I've learned from this period and put it into a course, like a digital course that people can access, but do it as a group and have the support of each other and have live support from me and use all the stuff I've learned about my own life and all the people's lives that I've worked with and bottle it in a way that's accessible to people. And this name, the Purpose Pursuit, came to me, this idea of being on an intentional pursuit of finding more purpose in our lives. And I messaged our friend James, who was our lodger at the time, who was at home, and said, do you want to help? And again, without knowing what I was doing, without having anywhere near the skill, and if I'd have known what it was going to involve, we would never have done it. We set to writing it. And as we sit here today, you and I and Laura and James are concocting Purpose Pursuit version 2, which is taking everything we've learned from the different cohorts and all the people that we've worked with to bring the course in a fresh way, a little bit more concise, a little bit more accessible to busy people who are juggling the load, busy women who are maybe, juggling children or juggling a life stage change or just juggling the nature of what it is to be a woman, and helping them find the time and space to pursue purpose because it's the best thing I ever did. And in the middle of all of that, what I've not really mentioned is, the biggest highlight of my life has been bringing up my children and watching them grow into the young men that they are. And I don't think my story is remarkable. I think it's everyday decisions and everyday choices and a bit of everyday risk, maybe above average risk, actually. We're probably above average risk. But I hope that the everyday nature of it is something that just feels accessible and feels, maybe I could make a choice. Maybe I could follow my hunch and my heart a little bit more. Because I don't think it's remarkable. I don't want people to think it's remarkable. But it is remarkable when you look back what you can see happen when you're willing to pursue that idea of purpose.